Hey there, this is James Wilson with MTB Strength Training Systems and BikeJames.com, and I'm here today with some bad stick figure drawings to help explain what's happening when you stand up to pedal. Obviously you can tell why I'm a strength coach and not an artist here with this, but what this is going to do is help me explain what's happening between your center of gravity and the bike center of gravity when you stand up to pedal, because that's the important relationship that a lot of people miss. Is what do I do? How do I get my center of gravity to line up properly and be able to manipulate that relationship based on what's happening on the trail? So our basic seated pedaling position, your butt is basically your center of gravity, your hips. This is, your center of gravity, also your source of power. The bottom bracket on your bike, where your cranks go into, is roughly your bike center of gravity as well, and it's also its center of power too. So you can kind of look at your bike's bottom bracket like your bike's butt or hips, and you want your hips and your bike's hips to be have a good relationship, to be lined up in the right way. So when you're sitting down, you can see that your bike's center of gravity here is actually in front of your center of gravity here. So gravity's pulling straight down on both these things, but your butt is actually a little bit behind your bike's bottom bracket here. So your bike is actually pulling you along when you're sitting down. If your bottom bracket is behind, if your butt is behind your bike's bottom bracket, then your center of gravity is behind your bike's center of gravity. The bike center of gravity is leading the way and actually pulling your center of gravity along with it. Now, when you stand up, we want this relationship to change. And this is the biggest mistake that people make when they go to stand up, is that they basically just kind of keep this relationship. They kind of stand up and they look like they're in kind of a hovering seated position instead of actually pushing their hips forward, standing up straighter, getting a straighter posture. Now you can see when you do that, what happens is now here's your bike center of gravity, and now here's your center of gravity. Now you are actually in front of your bike center of gravity. So your bike at this point is actually pushing you forward. Now also when you get up and you stand up and you get in this position, it helps you stay in this position more efficiently. When you push your hips forward, you're gonna get your back straighter. You're going to be able to put more, use your arms to hold your weight up, and you're also going to be able to drive your legs down and back, which is a more efficient use of your hips. You're actually gonna get more leg power and better leg extension when you stand up than you can ever do when you're sitting down. So that's one of the reasons that seated pedaling is so important for us on the trail, because it is really the most efficient, most powerful pedaling position for us to be in. We just have to work on being able to sustain it longer, because like I've said, it is a separate skill. Now, that's pretty simple to explain. The next question that I get is what happens on climbs, especially steep climbs, loose climbs where I don't have traction on the rear wheel? Don't I have to sit down? And I wrote a blog post about this and mentioned that really what people are mistaking is the fact that their butt on the seat is weighting the rear tire. They're not actually pressing into the bike with their seat as much as their butt being back on their seat is weighting the rear tire. Now, let me show you what I mean. So again, awesome stick figure drawings to show this, but when we go into an incline, one, you're gonna have to push your hips further. I mean, as the bike inclines, you're gonna have to get further over the front end to maintain this relationship. You're basically wanting to keep your center of gravity either on top of or preferably a little bit in front of your bike center of gravity. Now that works great when you have infinite traction, when you have good traction. This is the best way to pedal. But what happens is when we start to slip out, what happens when this gets loose? Now we have to push the hips back. So we push the hips back because what we want is for the hips in your bike center of gravity, or for your center of gravity to be over the rear wheel, over the rear axle, because we want the weight going in right there. So we have to actually change that relationship. We need to push the butt back. We need to get it back behind the bike center of gravity so the bike is now pulling us up the hill, but we're weighting the rear wheel to get that traction. So that's what we're looking for. Now this is where we get off a little bit, because you'll see that the key to this is your ability to hinge your hips back. Now, this is over the seat, but I'm not actually sitting on the seat. Remember, it's not your butt being in contact with your seat that weights your rear wheel. It's your butt being back in that area behind your bike's bottom bracket that weights the rear wheel. So you don't have to actually touch your butt to the seat in order to get this same sensation. Now, it's harder. Once you do this, see here, when we're standing upright like this, our spine, the skeletal structure is basically able to take more of the weight. That's why it's easier to stand up in this position. As soon as we lean over here, now we're having to rely more on core strength and things like that to hold us in this position. That's why sitting down on the seat feels easier, because the seat takes up the slack of a lot of riders' weak core. But if you have a strong enough core to be able to get back in this position and maintain a good strong posture in that position, then you can achieve the same thing of weighting the rear wheel without actually having to sit back down on the seat. And again though, this is where we kind of lose it, is if you don't have a good hip hinge. So basically you can't slide your butt back and your chest down and maintain a good strong posture. What happens is we feel like we got to weight the rear end, and so we start pushing back, but we do this. And so if you don't have a good hip hinge and you're hinging at that lower back, then you're not actually, remember, your lower back isn't your bike center of gravity. So what you end up with in this point is you get like some sort of like curved, posture, and the bike's, your center of gravity ends up here and it's more over, and so you're, you end up sliding out, you're not gaining the traction. And so the misinterpretation of that is that standing up to pedal, you need, is hard, and that doing it with loose traction is, almost impossible, that you have to sit down in order to weight your rear end, when it really boils down to just understanding where to put your center of gravity, and then beyond that, being able to do it. So again, me being able to explain it to you versus you being able to do it are two different things. And that's where mobility and strength training come in. Because if you physically have tight hips and a weak core, then you will not be able to slide your hips back and maintain that position on loose climbs. And you will always find yourself struggling to find traction when you stand up on loose climbs. So that's why the off the bike training becomes so important, because if you're not doing that stuff, then you don't have the physical tools that you need to get into the right position. If you can't get your hips forward good and get into a good, strong, upright position, then you'll have trouble standing up and pedaling, period. And if you have trouble with this hip hinge concept and getting the hips back so that you can weight the rear end, then you're gonna have trouble when you stand up and hit loose traction. So again, standing pedaling is not harder, it's just different. You just need to understand how to manipulate your center of gravity depending upon the situation. Normal standing pedaling, stand up, shift the hips in front of the bike's bottom bracket, in front of its center of gravity, so that now you're kind of falling forward. The bike is pushing you, and you're in front of the bike and it's pushing you along. When you need that extra traction, you can sit down, or you can just slide your hips back, and it will accomplish the same thing of allowing you to weight the rear end and keep traction on the rear tire. So that's basically it. Hopefully this explains a little bit better. You guys can see through my artistic rendering here that relationship between your center of gravity and the bike center of gravity, and how it affects standing pedaling. So again, this doesn't matter what kind of bike you're on, anything like that, this does apply. Now I will say real quick, I did mention in another article not too long ago that your bike fit can affect this, and particularly having a long stem, having a stem of like over 60 millimeters, like a 100 millimeter stem, which is really common on cross-country bikes, actually makes it harder for you to stand up and climb. And the reason for this is that longer stem will actually push you further out, which will pull your center of gravity further forward, so it makes it harder for you. You actually have to slide the hips back further in order to achieve the same position. Whereas if you had that shorter stem, everything is set back already, you're already kind of more naturally over that bottom bracket, it's easier to slide the hips back. So again, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but trust me, 10, 20, 30 centimeters on a stem can make a huge, huge difference in your stability and balance when you stand up to pedal. So that long stem only helps you if you're trying to stay seated and pedal, because it will help kind of distribute some of that weight over the rear, over the front end. But as soon as you stand up you lose that advantage. And in fact, that longer stem starts to pull you forward and mess with your balance in relation to the bike center of gravity. So anyway, just kind of a little side point there. But so that does it. Hopefully this helps clear up a few things. I know there'll be some questions and stuff, but again, just worry about these principles. How do you apply them on the trail? And you know, your riding will definitely get better. So once again, it's been James Wilson with MTB Strength Training Systems. You can check me out on the web at bikejams.com, and I'll talk to you next time.